The sky burned red above the alien capital. Great towers of crystal shattered as explosions echoed through the night. The once glorious palace of the alien queen trembled under heavy fire. Dust and smoke filled the air, turning the royal halls into a nightmare. The queen stood at the center of her throne room, her silver armor shining faintly under flickering lights. Her eyes were calm on the outside, but fear grew deep inside. Outside, the sound of blaster fire drew closer. The enemy army had broken through the last gate. Her guards, once loyal and fierce, now shouted in panic. "Retreat! Fall back!" one screamed. Others dropped their weapons and ran. The queen raised her voice, commanding them to stay, but no one listened. Even her strongest captains bowed their heads and fled. She was alone. For a moment, the mighty ruler of an empire stood in silence, surrounded by the ruins of her power. The walls cracked, the windows shattered, and flames painted the ceiling gold. She clenched her fists. Was this the end? Then through the smoke, she saw movement near the main door. A tall human figure stepped forward, his armor scorched and his helmet cracked. It was the last human soldier, once her prisoner, now her only protector. He looked at her, his face streaked with dirt and blood. "Your Majesty," he said, his voice rough but steady. "You need to move. They're coming." The queen blinked in disbelief. "Why are you still here?" she asked coldly. "My own guards have abandoned me." He gave a small, tired smile. "Because I don't run." Another explosion rocked the palace, shaking the ground beneath them. The human soldier turned, raised his rifle, and fired at the advancing enemy. The blast lit up the hall, revealing hundreds of armored invaders storming toward the throne room. "Get behind me," he ordered. The queen hesitated, pride fighting with instinct. But when a plasma bolt flew past her face, she obeyed, taking cover behind the broken throne. The soldier stood firm in the center of the hall, firing shot after shot, every move precise. His hands shook from exhaustion, but his eyes stayed sharp. The air smelled of fire and metal. Each blast echoed like thunder as he pushed back wave after wave. The queen watched him silently, her heart beating faster. She had seen thousands of warriors, but none like him. He fought not for reward, not for glory, just because he refused to abandon her. A grenade exploded near the entrance, throwing the soldier to the ground. The queen gasped as dust filled the air. For a moment she thought he was dead, but he rose again, limping, his armor smoking. He picked up his gun and shouted, "You'll have to do better than that." Something inside the queen shifted. The woman who had ruled through fear now felt something she had never known. Respect. "Human," she called out softly. "You are injured," he didn't answer. He was too busy firing again, covering every corner. His movement slowed, but he kept standing, his body like a wall between her and death. When the enemy retreated for a moment to reload, silence filled the throne room. The queen stepped out slowly, her eyes on the broken floor. "Why?" she asked again. "Why protect me?" The soldier wiped blood from his cheek. "Because someone has to." Her throat tightened. Those words were simple, but they carried more strength than any royal speech. Outside, another explosion shook the ground. The soldier glanced at her. "We can't stay here. The main gate is gone. They'll be inside again in minutes." He looked around and spotted a narrow corridor behind the throne. "That tunnel leads to the lower chambers, right?" The queen nodded slowly. "Yes, but it's dangerous. The structure might collapse," he gave a small laugh. "Then we'd better hurry." She followed him into the dark passage, the sound of battle fading behind them. The air was cold, heavy with dust. She could hear his breathing. Deep, steady, human. "Your kind," she whispered, "was supposed to be weak." He chuckled under his breath. "Yeah, that's what everyone says until we start fighting." For the first time in her life, the queen smiled. It was faint, almost invisible, but it was there. As they moved deeper underground, the ceiling trembled again. Rocks fell, sparks flashed. The soldier shielded her with his arm, pushing her to safety. His voice was calm even as the walls cracked around them. "We'll make it," he said. "Just trust me." The queen looked at him, this wounded human who had no reason to stay, no promise of reward, and she realized something strange. For the first time, she felt safe. Behind them, the great palace, the pride of her empire, collapsed into fire and ash. But inside the tunnels, a new story began, the story of a queen who lost everything, and the human who refused to leave her behind. The tunnel was narrow and dark. Broken cables sparked above their heads, throwing flashes of blue light on the cracked walls. The sound of the collapsing palace still echoed behind them. The queen's long cloak dragged through the dust and her breath came out uneven, half from fear, half from disbelief. The human soldier moved ahead with slow, steady steps. His shoulder bled, but he didn't stop. He held his weapon ready, scanning the shadows for movement. Every corner might hide an enemy scout. "Keep close," he said without turning around. "I do not take orders," the queen replied coldly, though her voice trembled. "Tonight you do," he answered calmly. For a moment silence hung between them. She had never been spoken to like that in her life. Yet she followed him. The tunnel opened into a large chamber, a forgotten armory beneath the palace. Broken shields, ancient blasters, and dust-covered crates filled the room. The human checked the door, then began dragging metal tables and armor pieces to block the entrance. "What are you doing?" the queen asked. "Buying us time," he said. "They'll be here soon." He stacked debris against the door and pulled out a small portable shield generator from his belt. The device buzzed to life, creating a faint blue barrier. It wasn't much, but it would slow down anyone trying to enter. The queen watched him in silence. The flickering blue light reflected on his face. Tired, dirty, but focused. He moved with purpose, every motion showing discipline. "You act as if you still believe we can win," she said. He looked up, his eyes steady. "As long as I'm breathing, it's not over." Her chest tightened. Such words. From a species her people once called primitive. The sound of footsteps came from the tunnel. Enemy soldiers were getting closer. The queen stepped back, fear rising in her heart. The human soldier crouched beside the barricade, gripping his rifle. "Stay low," he whispered. Blaster fire erupted. Red and green lights filled the room as the enemy tried to break through. The shield generator sparked under heavy hits. The queen flinched every time a blast hit, but the human didn't move from his position. He fired back calmly, hitting his targets one by one. Smoke filled the air, and the sound of energy bolts echoed through the metal chamber. The queen covered her ears. She had heard battles before, but never this close and never this desperate. "Why do they hate me so much?" she whispered. The soldier reloaded and answered without looking at her. "Because you're their symbol. If they take you, they take everything." The shield flickered, then went out completely. The human's jaw tightened. He stood up and threw a grenade toward the tunnel. The explosion shook the walls, filling the passage with fire and debris. When the dust settled, there was silence again. "They'll come again," he said, "but not yet." He sat down against a wall, breathing hard. His armor was cracked in several places, and a cut ran across his face. The queen slowly approached him. "You are injured," she said softly. He smiled faintly. "Nothing new." She knelt beside him. "Human, you could have escaped when my guards did. Why did you stay?" He looked at her, his eyes calm and honest. "Because leaving someone to die isn't who I am." She stared at him. The answer was simple, but it broke something inside her, a wall she had built all her life. For the first time, the alien queen felt small. Her empire, her crown, her power, none of it mattered here. Only this human's courage kept her alive. She wanted to speak, but the sound of a distant explosion stopped her. The soldier got up again, ignoring the pain in his leg. "We have to move," he said. "They'll send heavy units next." The queen hesitated. "You are too weak to fight more," he laughed quietly. "I've been worse." He grabbed a piece of metal and used it as a cane. Together they walked deeper into the tunnels. The lights flickered and dust rained down from the ceiling. The queen followed close behind, her heart beating faster each time he stumbled. At one point he almost fell and she caught his arm. Their eyes met. For a moment there was no queen and no soldier, just two souls trying to survive. "Human," she whispered. "You shame my kind with your bravery." He smiled faintly. "Then maybe there's still hope for both of us." They reached another large gate, the last defense point before the outer valley. He turned to her. "We hold here," he said. "If they reach this spot, it's over." She looked at him, then at the empty gate, and nodded. This time she didn't argue. She picked up a fallen blaster from the floor and held it in trembling hands. He raised an eyebrow. "Do you even know how to use that?" "Watch and learn," she said with quiet pride. The soldier chuckled softly, then faced the tunnel again, ready for the next wave. Outside, thunder rumbled, and the sound of marching feet drew near. The queen took a deep breath, feeling her fear fade into something new. Courage. For the first time, she wasn't fighting as a ruler. She was fighting beside a human who refused to give up. And in that moment, under the dim blue light of the shield, the last line of defense was drawn, not between two species, but against the darkness itself. The echo of footsteps faded through the tunnels. Silence returned, broken only by the slow dripping of water from the cracked ceiling. The air was thick with smoke and dust. The alien queen leaned against the wall, clutching the blaster close to her chest. Her arms trembled, not from fear but from exhaustion. The human soldier stood at the edge of the chamber, checking his weapon. His armor was dented, one side of his helmet missing. He looked like he should have fallen hours ago, yet he was still moving, still fighting. The queen watched him quietly. She had seen countless warriors die for her empire, but this man, this fragile human, refused to die even when there was no reason to live. Finally, she spoke. "Human, what drives you to fight for me? You owe me nothing. You are not my soldier." He didn't look at her. He reloaded his weapon, the click echoing softly in the chamber. "Maybe not," he said. "But I made a promise." "A promise?" she asked, frowning. "To whom?" He sighed and finally turned toward her. His eyes, tired but steady, met hers. "To myself. A promise that I would protect those who can't fight, no matter who they are. No matter where I end up." The queen's throat tightened. No alien, no soldier had ever said something so pure to her. In her empire, promises were tools, ways to gain power. But this man's words carried something different. "Something sacred. You protect even your enemies?" she whispered. He gave a small, tired smile. "Sometimes your enemies just need someone to remind them what mercy looks like." She looked away, unable to answer. Her hands clenched around the blaster. The human's words hit deeper than any wound. A deep rumble shook the tunnel. The floor cracked beneath their feet. Dust rained down from above. The human looked up sharply. "They're bombing the upper levels," he said. "We need to move deeper before the ceiling gives in." He limped toward the passage on the right. The queen followed close behind. Each step echoed like a heartbeat. As they walked, the queen's mind replayed everything she had seen since the fall of her palace. Her guards running, her empire crumbling, and this lone human standing between her and death. The image burned into her memory. "Human," she said after a while, her voice quieter, softer. "You're kind. You are fragile, short-lived, easily broken, yet you fight like nothing can stop you," he chuckled. "That's the thing about humans," he said. "We fight hardest when we're already broken." The queen stared at him, trying to understand. How could a species with no great strength still stand tall against entire armies? They reached a narrow section of the tunnel, where the walls glowed faintly from alien crystals buried in the rock. The light shimmered across his face, revealing how pale he had become. "You need rest," she said. He shook his head. "Can't. If I stop, you stop," she frowned. "You think I can't survive without you?" He smiled faintly. "No, I think you shouldn't have to." Her heart skipped a beat. There was something in his tone, gentle, almost protective. No one had ever spoken to her like that before. Another explosion roared through the tunnels, closer this time. The queen stumbled and the human grabbed her arm, pulling her away from falling debris. The tunnel ahead split in two. "Which way leads to the lower hangar?" he asked. "To the left," she answered. "But it's a long way." He nodded and began moving again. His leg dragged slightly, but he didn't slow down. The queen wanted to tell him to stop, to rest, but she couldn't find the words. Minutes passed. The sounds of battle grew distant. Only their footsteps remained. Finally, they stopped near an old control door. The soldier leaned against it, breathing hard. "We'll hold here for a bit," he said. The queen stood close, watching him struggle to stay upright. "Human," she said softly. "Your body will fail before your will does." He laughed weakly. "You're probably right." Then, to her surprise, he sat down and took out a small object from his pocket, a broken dog tag. He rubbed it gently between his fingers. "What is that?" she asked. "Something that belonged to a friend," he said. "He died protecting a family during the first invasion. I promised him I'd keep doing the same, protecting others no matter what." The queen lowered her eyes. The idea of sacrifice for others was strange to her. In her empire, weakness was punished. Kindness was seen as foolish. Yet this man's kindness had kept her alive. "Your promise," she said slowly. "It has no end?" He smiled again, his voice soft. "Not until I do?" For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The light flickered and dust swirled in the air like drifting stars. The Queen finally broke the silence. "You shame me, human. I ruled through fear. You lead through hope. Perhaps your kind is not as weak as we believed." He looked up at her, his expression gentle. Maybe strength isn't just about power. Maybe it's about how much you can lose and still keep going. The Queen turned away, hiding the emotion in her eyes. Above them, distant echoes of war still roared. But here, in the broken tunnels, something else began. A fragile bond between two beings from different worlds. The human soldier stood once more, his voice steady. "We move at dawn," he said. "I'll get you out." That's a promise, and this time the alien queen didn't argue. She simply nodded. For the first time in her life, she believed in someone other than herself. The tunnels stretched endlessly beneath the ruined palace, twisting like veins through the dying world above. The air was thick with dust and every breath felt heavy. The alien queen walked behind the human soldier, her footsteps echoing faintly. They had been moving for hours, deeper into the forgotten undercity. The human's limp had worsened. Each step sent a wave of pain through his leg, but he didn't stop. His flashlight flickered weakly as they reached a massive metal gate half buried under rubble. "This," he said, catching his breath, "leads to the lower hangar. If we can reach it, there might still be a ship left." The Queen tilted her head, her silver eyes dim under the faint blue glow of the tunnel. "You think any ship survived the attack?" He shrugged, a small smile touching his lips. "I like to think hope's harder to kill than steal." She stared at him for a moment. Even after all the pain, the loss, the endless fighting, he still smiled. That stubborn human hope was something she could neither understand nor ignore. Together they began clearing the rubble. The Queen, though weakened, used her strength to lift the heavy stones while he worked on the control panel. The wires sparked faintly as he rewired old circuits with his knife. "Human," she said, her voice softer than before. "Why do you risk your life for me again and again? You could have escaped through the north tunnels." He didn't look up. "Because I said I'd protect you, and I don't break promises." Her lips parted as if to reply, but the words never came. A low mechanical hum filled the air. The gate shuddered and began to lift slowly. A rush of cold wind blew through the tunnel, carrying the scent of smoke and ash. On the other side was a huge underground chamber. The lower hangar, now mostly in ruins. Broken ships lay scattered like skeletons. Fires burned in the corners and fallen metal beams glowed faintly from the heat. The soldier scanned the area. "We'll have to move fast. If the enemy tracks your signal, they'll follow us here." He stepped forward, his rifle raised. The Queen followed, her sharp eyes sweeping the shadows. Then from somewhere above came the sound of movement, soft, scraping metal. The soldier froze. "They're here." Before they could react, beams of red light cut through the darkness. Enemy scouts, small drones, hovered in, scanning the hangar. The soldier grabbed the Queen's arm and pulled her behind a fallen ship. "Stay low," he whispered. "Don't move." The Queen's heart pounded. The hum of the drones grew louder as they floated closer. She could see their bright red eyes scanning the debris. One of the drones drifted too close. The soldier waited, his finger tightening on the trigger. When it turned its lens toward them, he fired. A single perfect shot. The drone exploded silently into pieces. But it was too late. The others had detected the blast. Alarms blared, echoing through the hangar. "Run!" he shouted. They dashed through the wreckage, ducking under beams and jumping over broken metal. Energy bolts rained from above. The Queen stumbled once, her leg caught on twisted debris. But the soldier turned back instantly, grabbing her hand and pulling her free. She stared at him, breathless. "You risk your life too easily, human." He grinned despite the chaos. "And you talk too much. Keep moving!" They reached the far side of the hangar, where a small transport craft stood half buried in dust. The soldier climbed into the cockpit and began flipping switches. The controls sparked but refused to start. "Come on," he muttered. "Just a little more life left in you." The Queen stood near the doorway, firing the blaster toward approaching shadows. "They're closing in!" "I know," he said, hitting the console again. The ship hummed, coughed, and finally roared to life. The engines glowed faintly, shaking the floor. He turned to her. "Get in!" The Queen hesitated for a heartbeat, not from fear but from something else. She looked at him, this broken human who refused to quit, and for the first time she didn't see him as fragile. She saw him as unbreakable. She climbed aboard. The hangar doors above creaked open, light spilling in as more enemies arrived. The soldier pulled the throttle and the ship lifted, its engines screaming. Blaster fire chased them through the opening, but the ship shot upward, breaking through smoke and flame into the dark night sky. The Queen looked down through the window. Her city, or her entire empire, was nothing but ruins and fire. For the first time, she felt tears on her face. The human glanced at her, his voice quiet. "I'm sorry for your home." She shook her head. "No. You've shown me something more important than my crown." He smiled faintly, focusing on the stars ahead. "What's that?" "That even in the darkest night," she whispered, "light can come from the most unexpected place." They flew higher, the ship trembling under the strain. Behind them, the capital burned, but ahead the stars opened like a promise waiting to be fulfilled. The human exhaled slowly, leaning back in his seat. "We made it," he said softly. The Queen looked at him, her eyes shimmering under the starlight. "No, human," she said, almost smiling. "You made it." And for the first time in her life, the Queen of an empire bowed her head, not to power, not to fear, but to the courage of one man who refused to abandon her. The night sky stretched endlessly above them, painted with stars and smoke. The transport ship trembled as it sped across the upper atmosphere of the ruined world. Every few seconds, sparks flickered from its engines. It wasn't built to fly this long. Inside, the air was heavy with tension and silence. The alien Queen sat near the window, her silver eyes fixed on the burning cities below. Once those fires had been symbols of her empire's might. Now they were the remains of her pride. The human soldier sat across from her, his body leaning back against the wall, helmet resting beside him. His face was pale, his lips dry, and a deep wound on his shoulder still bled slowly through the cloth he had tied around it. "Your arm," she said softly. "You're losing too much blood." He gave a small grin. "I've had worse." "You said that before," she replied, her voice trembling slightly. "Is that your kind's answer to everything?" He laughed weakly. "Pretty much." For a moment she almost smiled, but her expression soon turned serious again. "Human, if you die, your promise ends. Why not rest?" He looked at her with quiet eyes. "If I stop now, you die too." "I'm not ready to break that promise." Her throat tightened. There was no arrogance in his tone, no desire for reward, only truth. The ship shook violently as alarms blared. The human quickly leaned forward, checking the controls. "They're locking on us." "Enemy flyers," he said. The Queen stood behind him, her eyes wide. "Can we escape?" "Not with speed," he said. "But maybe with smoke." He flipped a switch and thick clouds of vapor burst from the ship's rear engines, hiding them from scanners. He turned sharply toward the mountains ahead. "Hold on tight." The ship dove low, skimming over sharp ridges and glowing rivers of molten rock. The Queen gripped the wall, her heart racing. Outside, flashes of enemy fire followed them. One blast hit the wing and the whole ship jolted. The human gritted his teeth, fighting the controls. "We're going down." The ship crashed into a barren valley, sliding across dust and stone until it came to a stop beside a cracked ridge. Smoke poured from the engines. The silence afterward was almost deafening. The Queen groaned, pulling herself up. "Are you—" "I'm fine," he said, though blood dripped from his temple. "But we can't stay here." He stepped out of the ship first, scanning the horizon. The valley stretched endlessly, a wasteland of ash and broken rock. In the distance, faint lights moved across the sky. "Enemy search drones. We'll have to move before they find us," he said, turning back. The Queen stepped out behind him. The cold wind whipped through her torn cloak. "Where will we go?" "There's an old battlefield north of here," he said. "If I'm right, there's still a signal beacon there. I can call for help." They began walking through the wasteland. The Queen followed silently, her thoughts heavy. Around them lay wrecks of old machines, shattered weapons, and bones half buried in dust. The place felt haunted, a graveyard of wars past. At one point, the human stopped and looked up at the sky. "Funny," he said softly. "All this fighting and the stars still look peaceful." The Queen's eyes followed his. "Peaceful," she echoed. "I used to think peace was weakness. Now I see it's the hardest thing to protect." He smiled faintly. "Then maybe you've already started to change." They reached the center of the battlefield, a hill made of old armor and broken banners. The soldier fell to one knee, panting heavily. The Queen rushed to his side. "Your wound, it's worse," he shook his head. "Just tired." She tore a piece from her cloak and pressed it against his shoulder to stop the bleeding. Her hands trembled. You shouldn't have saved me. You should have saved yourself. He looked at her, his eyes soft even through the pain. Saving you is saving myself. You don't see it yet, but your life means something. Not just to your people, but to everyone who believes enemies can change. The Queen froze. You believe I can change? I already see it, he said. The Queen who once ruled through fear now kneels in the dirt helping a human soldier. For a long moment they said nothing. The wind howled softly through the ruins. Then the Queen spoke again, her voice shaking. You humans, she whispered, you make us see the things we've buried. I used to think emotion was a weakness, but now it's the only thing keeping me alive. He smiled faintly. Guess that's what we do best. Mess with people's hearts. She gave a quiet laugh, almost human herself. But then his head slumped slightly. The smile faded from her face. Human, she said, gripping his shoulders. Stay awake. He blinked slowly, just resting my eyes. No, she said, her voice breaking. You promised to protect me. He looked up at her, his lips curling into a faint smile. And I will, as long as I breathe. Tears filled her eyes, something she had never allowed before. She held him against her, his head resting on her shoulder. For the first time, the mighty alien queen wept. Not for her empire, not for her throne, but for the fragile human who had taught her what courage truly was. Above them, the stars burned quietly. The battlefield was silent except for the soft sound of her breathing and his fading heartbeat. And in that silence, the Queen made a vow. If you live, she whispered, I will protect you as you protected me. That is my promise. The wind howled across the empty valley. Gray dust swirled like ghosts over the forgotten battlefield. The alien queen knelt beside the human soldier, his head resting in her lap. His breathing was shallow, his armor cracked and his pulse faint. The stars above shimmered weakly through the thick clouds. She looked down at him, this fragile creature who had defied armies to protect her. For the first time in her long reign, she felt powerless. No command, no weapon, no title could save him now. Only her voice, soft and shaking, could fill the silence. Human, she whispered, brushing the dirt from his face. You cannot die here. You promised me. His eyes opened slightly, faintly glowing in the pale light. I don't plan to, he said weakly, forcing a small grin. Her heart tightened. Then don't speak. Save your strength. He shook his head slowly. Strength is all I've given. Maybe it's time I give something else. Before she could ask what he meant, a deep rumble echoed across the valley. From the horizon, lights appeared. Dozens of enemy ships descending like dark stars. The ground vibrated under their engines. The Queen's instinct screamed run, but she knew it was useless. They've found us, she whispered. The human forced himself up, pain flashing across his face. He reached for his weapon and loaded the last few energy cells. Then this is where we make our stand. You can't fight them alone, she protested. He turned to her, smiling faintly. Didn't I tell you? I'm never alone. She looked at him, wounded, broken, and still smiling, and something inside her changed again. She rose to her feet beside him, gripping the blaster tightly. Then neither am I, she said. For a moment, the two of them stood together under the burning sky, a queen and a soldier side by side. The enemy ships touched down, kicking up waves of dust. Armored figures marched out in lines, their weapons glowing red. The human crouched behind a fallen beam and aimed carefully. We'll hold them here, he said. The Queen nodded, her pulse racing. Until the end. The first blast came fast, and a rain of energy bolts lighting up the valley. The human rolled aside, returning fire. His shots hit their marks, burning through enemy armor. The Queen followed his lead, her aim uncertain at first but improving quickly. Good shot, he shouted between bursts. Do not sound so surprised, she replied, almost smiling. The air burned with heat and smoke. The enemy advanced closer. Explosions tore through the ground. The human's arm bled again, but he didn't stop. He fired until his rifle overheated, then picked up another weapon from a fallen foe. The Queen's eyes glowed fiercely. Her voice, once used to command thousands, now shouted only one word. Fight! Echoing across the battlefield like thunder. But no matter how hard they fought, the enemies kept coming. The human's back hit a rock wall. He turned to the Queen. There's too many. She looked around desperately. The only way out was blocked, except for one narrow pass behind them. If we overload the ship's reactor, she said quickly. It could destroy them all. He blinked. That blast would kill us too. She met his gaze, her voice steady. Then we die together, like warriors. He hesitated only a second, then nodded. Let's finish this. They ran toward the crashed ship, bullets and fire flying past. The human dragged himself inside, ripping off a panel and exposing the glowing core. Once this overheats, we'll have 2 minutes, he said. The Queen placed her hand on his arm. Human, you have done enough. You should not have to die for me. He looked up at her, his smile calm. It's not about dying for you. It's about making it mean something. Her eyes glimmered. Then let it mean something for both of us. The timer began to flash red. Outside, the enemy soldiers drew closer. The ground shook as heavy machines rolled in. The human limped to the doorway, his weapon ready for one last fight. They're almost here, he said. The Queen stood beside him, her armor cracked, her crown long gone. Let them come. The first wave stormed the ridge. The human fired, each shot a spark of defiance. The Queen joined him, her voice rising like a battle cry that echoed through the valley. Blinding light filled the sky as the reactor's energy reached its peak. The Queen looked at him one last time. Human, she whispered, you kept your promise. He smiled faintly, eyes soft. And you kept your faith. Then the world exploded in white. The blast ripped across the valley, consuming everything in light and wind. The ground shook, the sky split, and for a moment everything was silent. No pain, no fear, only peace. When the smoke cleared, the valley was still. Nothing moved. The ship was gone. The armies were gone. Only a glowing crater remained, filled with shimmering dust that drifted upward into the stars. And in that light, the galaxy would remember what happened there. The day an alien queen and a human soldier stood side by side and proved that courage could burn brighter than war itself. The sun rose slowly over the silent valley, a dim golden light spreading across the ashes of battle. Smoke drifted from the crater where the explosion had torn through the land. The ground was blackened, the air still humming with the memory of fire. For a long time, nothing moved. Then, from beneath the rubble, a small glimmer of light broke through the dust. A hand, pale, trembling, pushed aside the debris. The alien queen emerged, coughing weakly, her armor shattered and burned. She looked around in confusion. The valley was quiet, empty, lifeless. The once bright stars had faded into daylight. Her body ached with pain, but that wasn't what made her chest hurt. Human? She whispered hoarsely. No answer. She stumbled forward, searching the ruins. Every step left a mark in the ash. Her once proud steps were now unsteady, desperate. Her heart raced as she climbed over what was left of the ship. Human, she called again, louder this time. The echo of her voice was the only reply. She sank to her knees, staring at the crater. Her hands trembled. The memories rushed back. His voice, his promise, the way he smiled even when surrounded by death. For the first time in her life, the Queen, the ruler of countless worlds, broke down and wept. Her tears fell silently into the dust. You foolish brave man, she whispered. You kept your promise. The wind blew softly through the valley, carrying with it the faint scent of burnt metal. Among the debris, something caught her eye. A small piece of shining metal, half buried in the ground. She reached for it and pulled it free. It was his dog tag. Scratched, bent, but still whole. The same one he had shown her when he spoke of his fallen friend. She held it tightly in her palm, pressing it to her chest. And now I will keep mine. The Queen stood slowly, her tears drying under the morning light. She looked at the horizon, her city's ruins far in the distance. She could return, rebuild, reclaim her throne, but she knew she could never rule the same way again. Hours later, a rescue ship from her empire descended into the valley. Soldiers ran out, shocked to see their queen alive. They bowed deeply, speaking in hurried voices, but she raised her hand for silence. There is no victory here, she said coldly. Only sacrifice. Her voice carried through the valley like wind through stone. She turned to her generals, her expression calm but fierce. "Prepare the royal chamber," she commanded. "There will be a new law, one written not in pride, but in memory." Her soldiers exchanged confused looks, but obeyed. As they helped her aboard, she looked down one last time at the crater, the place where a single human had stood against an army to protect her. Weeks passed. The great capital of her empire rose from the ashes, rebuilt stronger than before. The queen sat upon her throne again, but the crown on her head no longer shone with arrogance. Behind her throne hung a single relic, the human soldier's weapon, cleaned and polished, mounted beside the royal crest. Beneath it, carved into the wall in both alien and human script, were simple words. Courage is not bound by species. Honor belongs to the heart. Every visitor, every ambassador, and every young warrior who entered the royal hall paused before that weapon. And when they asked the queen why it was there, she always gave the same answer. Because once, when everyone ran, one human stayed. She ruled differently now. Her voice was still commanding, but her heart had changed. She sought peace where she once demanded war. Her soldiers were taught mercy. Her council learned humility. The empire slowly began to heal. But every morning, before the first light touched her throne, the queen would stand at her balcony, holding the small dog tag in her hand. She would whisper to the stars, to the place where she believed his soul now drifted. "You are not forgotten, my human. You saved more than my life. You saved what was left of my soul." Sometimes, on clear nights, she imagined she could hear his voice in the wind. Soft, steady, warm. "Promises don't end, Your Majesty. They just find new keepers." And she would smile, eyes glistening. "Then I will keep yours, until the stars fade." Years later, legends spread across the galaxy. They spoke of the alien queen who was once heartless, but changed because of one dying soldier's bravery. They called her the Queen of Two Worlds, the ruler who carried both the strength of aliens and the heart of a human. And deep in her palace, beneath the royal emblem, a statue stood, two figures carved from white stone. One was the queen, standing tall with her crown lowered. Beside her stood a human soldier, his weapon in hand, his eyes forever facing the horizon. At the base of the statue were words that echoed through time. He stood for her when no one else did. She changed because he never stopped believing. Together they proved that even across galaxies, humanity shines brightest in the dark. The queen closed her eyes one final time many years later, the same dog tag still in her hand. Her last whisper was simple, filled with peace, not sorrow. "Rest well, my human. Your light still guides us." And as the stars burned softly above her world, the promise that began on a dying battlefield lived on. A story of loyalty, love, and the courage of one human who stood for a queen when the galaxy turned away.